So today we're going to talk about retiring as a millionaire, and you're probably um, maybe starting out on your first truck as a new owner operator, and we're talking about retiring. You're at the beginning of the journey, and we want to talk about the end of the journey. And you may think this is way, way, way down the road. I'll tell you as an owner operator that it will go by very quickly. You know, in a blink of an eye, 10 years will go by and you're like, where did all the time go? And you're like, you think you'll never become a millionaire because how could you possibly get there when time goes by so quickly? And maybe you haven't made as much progress as you think you should. But you do got to manage your expectations a little bit. Don't set yourself up for failure with unreasonable expectations. Becoming a millionaire is possible as a truck driver. Even if you're not an owner operator, if you're just a company driver, you can become a millionaire. But it's going to take you your entire trucking career, 20 years or more. So don't think you can become a millionaire in your first 5 years. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in your first 10 years. It's going to be over 20 years. And the reason for that is because the only way to get there is compound interest. And that means you have to invest your money. So we talked about rookie recommendations. We talked about sophomore slump. And then we talked about decommissioning year of your truck. And now we're going to talk about the whole time span of your career and retiring as a millionaire. So obviously over a 20-year period you're going to be buying and selling trucks. You'll probably be at 2 to 3 million miles. So you're going to have a tremendous amount of experience in that time frame. And along the way, you have to save your money, so you never get away from saving money. It becomes second nature to you. You don't even think about it, because you learned as a rookie that you need to save your money. You learned during your sophomore slump that you need to save your money. And you learned during your decommissioning year, your third year as owner operator, you need to save your money. And you build these money saving skills along the way. And your first benchmark on this journey to becoming a millionaire is to reach $100,000 invested. I know that sounds, outlandish to think that you'll ever have $100,000. You may be broke on your ass right now, and you're like, I don't even have $10,000, and you're talking about having $100,000. You're thinking that is fantasy land, but it's not. It's not fantasy land. You can do it. I mean, it will take you some effort. I mean, no one's going to hand you $100,000, but you can do it probably in 5 years, or maybe even a little bit less than 5 years. If you break it down, $100,000 is really only, I'll put this in quotation marks, only $20,000 a year for 5 years. Now, can you save $20,000 a year for 5 years? I think you can. And you're not even going to have to save $100,000, because during that time frame, compound interest is going to work for you on that money as well. So you may only have to save $85,000, and then compound interest take you the rest of the way. So let's just say, for argument's sake, you need to save $80,000. Okay, over 5 years. That's less than $20,000 a year. Now you're talking, I don't know what the math is, whatever, 80 divided by 5. You're probably getting closer to, maybe $15,000 a year. You could do that. You could definitely do that. And in 5 years, you would have $100,000 invested. You probably have money in addition to that in your checking, savings account, and your maintenance account. But Charlie Munger, who's the co-founder of Berkshire Hathaway, along with Warren Buffett, his advice, he's a billionaire. He recently passed away, but his thing was, you got to get your hands on $100,000 invested. It's the hardest money you'll ever make. You'll never work as hard for that money ever again in your life because of compound interest. Your money will be making money. So this is a key to success, is to get that $100,000 benchmark. I think you could do it in 5 years, maybe a little bit less. With the warranty on these newer trucks, it's very doable. Like when I first started, there was no warranty. So a lot of my truck repairs was out of pocket. I had a 2012 Freightliner Cascadia, and it took all my money. So it took me longer than 5 years to reach $100,000 because there wasn't any warranty. Now these trucks come with warranty, so you definitely should reach it in 5 years. It's a journey. It's a wealth generation journey. And all I can tell you is that you just keep at it. I know, when you don't have a lot, that seems like a mountain. You're looking at that $100,000 and you think you'll never get there, but you will get there. Just keep at it. Now, the thing is, once you reach $100,000, compound interest is really going to kick in, because some years, your investments will grow 20 to 30%. Well, 20 to 30% on $100,000 is an additional $20 to $30,000. So you're going to continue to save, and your money is going to continue to grow. And this is your path towards becoming a millionaire. I included in the description an investment calculator from Dave Ramsey's website. Dave Ramsey is a financial advisor. He's got some good ideas. I don't agree with everything he does, but he's got some really good strategies and ways to think about things. Use that investment calculator. Try this as an exercise. Put in $100,000 as your initial, what you have currently. Put in your age. Put in, say, 15% interest rate. Okay? And put in like the age you want to retire. And it'll calculate, what your investment portfolio will be. And you have to put in how much you're going to contribute every month. And it'll calculate what your investment portfolio will be when you retire. So I did it, and I only want to work, say, another 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, I have well over $1 million if I continue on the path that I'm on. And I'm older, so if you're younger, you could become more than $1 million, maybe become $2 million or more. Or you could contribute less and still become a millionaire. So use that calculator as a guide. It's like, you want to think about how do you become a millionaire? Well, there's your guide. It's plug in your numbers and use that as a guide. Now, I'll tell you, life happens over 15 or 20 years, and there may be setbacks. That's okay. That's part of life. But in general, that'll give you a guide that you can go by. But the key is, you got to get that first $100,000 invested. I mean, that's really what you should be working for. Charlie Munger said, he didn't care if you have to walk everywhere. You have to use a coupon card to buy your lunch. Get your hands on $100,000. I mean, this is playing the game. You want to win, you got to play the game. And part of the game is get your hands on $100,000. Life will become easier when you do. When you're poor and you have expenses, it seems like everything is impossible. Everything is just tremendously stressful. And you're trying to make ends meet, and it always seems like you're behind the 8 ball. You build your wealth up to $100,000, things get easier, a lot easier. And now you can see for yourself how you're going to do it, how you're going to reach $100,000. I just spilled my coffee. But It can be done, so use that calculator I put in the description. Now, a lot of drivers are younger, so, they want to have families and kids and buy houses and cars and things like that. That's fine, but continue to use that calculator. When you're younger, time is on your side. So instead of retiring in 10 years, maybe you'll retire in 20 years or even 30 years. That gives you more time to build your wealth and use that investment calculator and see where you're going to end up. If you're older, say you're in your 40s or 50s, you don't have as much time. So you're going to have to contribute more on a monthly basis. First, you got to reach 100,000, and then you're going to have to make higher contributions per month in order to reach $1 million status. Now, I personally probably would never retire. I've talked to a lot of guys who've retired, and they don't like it. It sounds great that you'll have all this free time, right? You can do all this stuff in your house and everything you ever want to do. That lasts about 6 months. And then after 6 months, you're totally bored. And if you've ever had extended period of unemployment in your life prior to getting to trucking, it's not a lot of fun to stay home. I would prefer to travel. I would prefer to be in the truck, traveling the country, interacting with people, stay active. A lot of times when people retire, they get into that reclining chair and they're retired and they're dead within 6 months. The job was the only thing keeping them alive. I might be one of those guys who's still driving trucks, 75 years old or older. As long as I can do it, I would probably keep at it. So would I become a millionaire during that time frame? I would think so. I would probably become a millionaire probably around age 65. I could retire, but probably won't. I'll probably just buy nicer trucks, get a cushy trucking job, travel the whole country, maybe be on the spot market, drive when I feel like it, and just enjoy it. A lot of older guys, enjoy driving truck. This is what they want to do. They are at their best when they're playing the game at a very high level, and now that they're at the end of their career, they enjoy it. They're not going to give that up. They've developed their skills for 20, 30 years. They're some of the best truck drivers in the industry. They're not going to sit at home and give that up. They're probably going to keep on driving, which means they'll be driving truck as millionaires. So they don't worry about nothing. Absolutely nothing. Even at $100,000 benchmark, when you reach that, you really don't worry about anything. You go buy another truck if you really need to. When you reach 50,000 in your business is pretty strong. When you have $50,000 available to handle everything that comes up, you're pretty strong at 50,000. You're really strong at 100,000. So these are benchmarks that you work for year over year over year. And once you see the path, then you can start walking the path. But many times drivers can't even find the path. They have no idea where they're going with their career. They're just winging it. Things come up, they spend their money, and they never reach their financial goals. Part of the reason why they never reach their financial goals is because they didn't lay out the path. They don't know how to get there, or they're not willing to walk the path. It's easy to say, okay, here's how you become a millionaire. Now you got to go do it. Now you got to execute the plan. And some guys can't do it for a variety of reasons. Maybe it's family, maybe it's marriage, maybe it's kids, maybe it's their health, who knows. Then other guys, are totally oblivious to their, being a path. They have no idea there's a path to becoming a millionaire. There's a path, and, you could you can have minor deviations of how you're going to get there, but generally speaking, there is a path. And reaching $100,000 is like the first leg of the path. You know, you got to get that part done first in order to have any chance of becoming a millionaire. You know, and if it takes you 10 years to get $100,000, you know, that's fine if you prefer a slower pace. You know, but at least you'll be on the path. You know, some guys are never on the path. You know, they spend their money. You know, they make bad investments. You know, when you think about stuff that guys spend their money on, most of the stuff they spend their money on depreciates in value. You know, if you buy a car, it depreciates. If you buy a motorcycle, it depreciates. You buy a boat, it depreciates. You buy an RV, it depreciates. You know, what are the things that go up in value? Real estate and stocks. Your stock portfolio, that goes up. Hard assets, that goes up. Things that depreciate, you know, that's what guys spend their money on. You know, that's why they don't ever reach $100,000, and they'll never become millionaires. You know, so keep this in mind, that for each and every one of you that is a driver, it's in your reach in your career to become a millionaire. Now, whether or not you go down that path, it's up to you. You know, you make bad decisions along the way, you'll never get there. You know, so you have to learn how to play the game. You're going to have to reach these benchmarks of like $100,000 invested. You're going to have to learn how to save and invest, and you're going to have to learn how to use compound interest to your advantage, use time to your advantage. You know, if you do that, yeah, you can become a millionaire. You do something else, you'll never become a millionaire. You know, you're off the path. You know, once you're off the path, you know, you're going to have to fight to get back on the path. You know, so try to stick as close to the path as possible if that's what you want. Some guys don't care if they become a millionaire. You know, their priorities are different. You know, not that it's wrong, it's just different. You know, they'll be like, you know, 500,000 is good enough. You know, they may never retire, so they don't need to be a millionaire. You know, if they can achieve all their life's goals and have 500,000, that's good enough. You know, you'll have to decide what's best for you. But the younger you are, the longer you have in the market, the odds are you're going to become a millionaire or more than a millionaire. So, you know, use that investment calculator. I put it in the description. You know, plug in some numbers. I'll tell you that historically the S&P 500 average is 10%. So that might be a good number to use. You know, say, okay, you know, 10% for the next 10 years or 20 years, however long. See where that ends up. You know, and that will be your guide. You know, that'd be like, okay, well, I got 20 years till I retire, and if I use this investment calculator, it kind of shows me how much I need to contribute each month, and tells me what my total will be at the end of, you know, this length of time, and see what it takes, see what it's going to take for you to become a millionaire. But it can be done. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.